But if you have your Bibles, I want you to open up to Mark chapter 4, because we've been going through this conversation called the simple gospel. We have a tendency in our world, in our lives, in our hearts, in everything that we do to overcomplicate some of the very simple elements of who Jesus is, what Jesus has done for us. And if we're not careful, we can walk into church, we can gain knowledge, we can gain information, we can hear the parables, we can hear the stories, and we can get into something out there in the world and not apply what we learned today because we have them in separate boxes. You're not the only ones that do this. The disciples and the people that followed Jesus really had to work through what his words were, what his teachings were, how he actually went through the things of his life, and how it applied to them. So if you have your Bibles, I want you to open to Mark chapter 4. And in Mark chapter 4, we see a story that starts in verse 35. Now, before verse 35 of Mark chapter 4, Jesus has been teaching somewhat like this. He goes into settings and he teaches people. He engages their heart. He engages their life. He heals people. He does these incredible miracles to where people are following him going, man, whatever it is you got, I want to be a part of that. Because there's something that you're doing. There's a way that you're living. There's a way that you're seeing everything that I'm not. And I want to be a part of how you're seeing things. Because you see everything so differently. And that is no different than how you and I are. When it comes to Christianity, when it comes to Jesus, when it comes to the way that he teaches us, speaks to our hearts, works in our lives, he teaches us these things. We read Scripture, we read the stories, and what we find about Jesus in all of these stories and all of these parables is he lives it differently. He sees it differently. And so the people begin to follow him going, okay, we're walking in a different path. We're walking a different way. We're following after Jesus. So in verse 35, here's what happens. On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, let us go across to the other side. Now the world was going good on this side. Did all y'all catch that? This is one of these conversations that moves so critical in our faith and in our life. They had been listening to him teach. They had seen him do miracles. They had seen him do healings. People were beginning to respond. I mean, the gospel was beginning to get out. And all of a sudden, Jesus sees the people gathering, the response being heard, the people following, and here's what he says to them. Let's go over there. Now, here's what all of us like to do. Well, why? Like, isn't it good here? Like, isn't everything okay in this point, at this moment? Like, is your life right now? Here's one of the places your world may be in, that you walked in today, and everything is good for you today. Like your home is good, your finances are good, your family is good, your health is good. The things of your life all add up, and they are... Okay, so I like some response a little bit. Y'all don't respond. I'll start jumping up and down because that's my way to get energy moving in me a little bit. So if you see me jumping up and down, don't be afraid. There's not ants on the floor. It's just I get excited. So we see things of our life, and we have a potential to look at it and say it is good. And whenever it's good, you begin to fortify that. You begin to look at that and go, okay, this stuff of my world is okay. And like, I'm okay. I'm happy. I'm content. And I'm fine. And so, Jesus, I'm going to follow you, but I'm going to follow you knowing that it's good. I'm going to follow you knowing that the world around me is all together and everything is functioning just fine. And so we walk into our faith, we walk into our lives from a good position going, if I'm going to follow you, Jesus, I'm going to expect everything remain good. He hears that in our hearts. He hears that in our lives. He hears that in your world. So if you came in today and that's how you're feeling, then you're not alone in that he knows that about humanity, that whenever we find good, we want to sit there. And we want to defend that. So Jesus speaks into the world and he says, let's go to the other side. So he gets them into a boat, and here's what happens, all right? And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat. So who did they leave? Make me jump. All right? I'll say it again because maybe you didn't hear it. And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat. So who did they leave? The crowd. You see, this is important. Jesus sees the crowd, and he knows that the crowd oftentimes is only there for the good. And so Jesus looks at this, sees this, identifies this, and he goes, all right, we're going to go get in the boat, and we're going to leave the crowd. Whenever you leave the crowd in your life, for you personally, this isn't for Pastor Mike, this isn't for Pastor JP or for Pastor Josh, this is whenever you leave the crowd in your own world, and you step out of that for a moment, you move into this unknown spot where all of a sudden everybody is over there watching you. You're no longer safe. It's no longer just secure because the crowd's over there. And where it is safe and where it is good, oftentimes we think is where the crowd is. Because if the crowd is there, it must be good. So Jesus takes his disciples, and he takes the people that are going to follow him. And he goes into a boat, but it also says this, and what? Other boats were with him. So it's not like Jesus just takes the 12 and goes, okay, you 12, we're going to go to just the core. So I'm going to put you on the boat. Everybody else is staying here. No, what we find is that Jesus, with his 12, get in a boat. But also, there is a second layer that follow him in their boats. And they are following this guy because it has been good. Like, they've paid attention. They've seen what he's done. They've seen, and they're like, we're leaving our jobs. We're leaving everything that we know. We're leaving the familiar. And we're going out following you because it is good. Like, this is incredible. The things you're saying, the things you're speaking, people are actually listening to you. You are speaking with authority and with power. We haven't seen that, so we're going to follow you with that. So even if you go out on the water, on the stillness, on the goodness of all of this, we're going to get all the boats, and we're going with you. So they, as a little entourage, all take their boats, and they're out in the water. And they're sitting there honestly thinking in their mind, everything is good. We are with Jesus. We would never see anything bad happen to us. Up to this point, nothing wrong has happened in our world. Maybe for you today coming in here, up to this point, nothing wrong has happened in your world. And you're following Jesus, checking these boxes off, going, okay, I'm following him. I'm singing the songs. I'm telling people about Jesus. And as long as I do all of these things, everything in my world is going to be... See, most of y'all had that. Some of y'all were a little bit wondering, but that's okay. It's going to be good. This is how many of us will live most of our Christian lives. When it is good, Jesus is with us. And so when it comes time to praise reports, when it comes time to speak about the goodness of God, we'll go, yeah, you know what? God's been good to me. My finances are great. Man, you know what? God's been good to me. My health is good. Man, you know what? God has been good to me. My home isn't falling apart right now. You know what? God has been good to me. My job seems to be exploding with growth, and it's incredible. Everything I seem to do, everything I touch, just absolutely explodes with growth and goodness. So God must be on my side. And we rest contently in that. And what we find often is this, that for the Christian, we are either about to walk into a storm or we're about to walk out of a storm. We never find, and this is something very important for my world and for your world, for us to hear today, we never find Jesus leading us in the places of just a still water where it stays still. And that's important because we had this definition that if Jesus is with me and I am with him, then everything I'm doing is going to be good. The disciples had the same definition, and he knew that about their hearts. He knew that they were getting into a place where everything they touched, everything they did was just good. He was teaching, it was good. People were responding, miracles were happening, like it was great. And so here's what happens. Verse 37. This is just the introduction, guys, so we got a few minutes. So, and a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling up. But Jesus was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. Have you ever felt like, so now we're going to begin to move out of it's good. Now all of a sudden, we're going to speak to the people in the room today whose world has gone from being good to going, my boat's filling up and Jesus is sleeping in the front. That's how I feel right now. So what's my praise report? I don't know, because I think Jesus is sleeping in the front of my boat. Like he's not awake, he's not engaging me. I don't feel like things are going good. I feel like things are going awful, to the point to I'm wondering if Jesus is even paying attention to me whatsoever. I feel like I'm screaming, I'm yelling, the boat's filling up, and Jesus is sleeping. Like, is that sleeping on the job? Like, is that like fire-worthy stuff? Like, is this a deal breaker for following Jesus? Because we get there, because we thought our game plan was, as long as it is good, then I'm going to be in good standing with Jesus. But the moment it doesn't go to being good anymore, the moment that breaks down, Christianity has a tendency to go to a very dark place. And we have to explore that, because Mark is engaging us with that. This scripture of who Jesus is and what Jesus does and how Jesus acts on our behalf, in us, for us, through us, is to help us see that sometimes it cannot be going good and Jesus is still with us. You may be in the midst of your boat filling up, and you are almost at the point where you are going, what is happening? Just like these disciples were here. The boat's filling. Like, you know, they probably thought about this for a minute. And you may be in the midst of this process. Like, you see the wind starting to pick up, and you're like, okay, he's going to wake up in just about a moment here. And he's going to take care of this for me. And so you may have walked in, and the windstorm in your life may be just barely starting to form. And you're just feeling that breeze on your face that you're like, okay, I know this can't be good much longer. Like yesterday, we were at the pool, and we're out there swimming, everybody having fun, and it's sunshine, it's pretty, but all of a sudden you begin to see the big clouds form, and you're like, okay, I'm on a time clock here. Like, I know something's about to take place in my world, and it's going to change what I'm currently doing. The disciples are seeing this windstorm pick up. And probably for the longest time, they're acting as disciples. Can you imagine them sitting there, talking about it? Wind's blowing. Hey, guys, it's all good. Jesus has got this. You ever had that counseling session where you're in the middle of a storm, and so I was like, I see the storm rising. It's all good. Jesus got this. And you sit there and you talk to him for a few minutes, and then all of a sudden you actually feel okay, like Jesus has this. And you're like, okay, I'm confident now. So you stand up from the meeting, and you're like, okay, great. You walk out the door, and it's just like a big, huge wave smacks you on the side of the head. And you're like, I thought it was good, And Jesus had this. The disciples are watching the boat fill up. They're not abandoning ship. They're not bailing on their faith. They're not going, okay, it's over. We're done. They're just seeing the boat fill up and they're going, I think he's going to handle this at some point. You're probably watching the water fill up in your world going, I think he's going to handle this at some point. Like at some point, the relationship's going to get better. At some point, my finances are going to get good. At some point, the healing's going to take place. At some point, things are going to be fine. And so you're watching it get taller and taller and taller, and the boat get bigger and bigger, filled with water, and you're going, okay, God, anytime. So here's what I want you to know. Some of us walked in today, in this room. You're here going, okay, God, anytime. And you can sing the songs. You can hear the literature. You can go through all of this. But at the core of your spiritual being, you're looking at God going, okay, God, anytime. Because the boat's filling up. And the reason I'm here today isn't because I feel like we're all good. The reason I'm here today is because I feel like my boat's filling up and I'm expecting something to happen at some point. Like, when are you going to wake up? When are you going to wake this thing inside of me? So that I can feel like you're feeling, because you're apparently sleeping in the front of the boat. So he feels pretty good. So here's what happens. Verse 38. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they finally woke him up and said to him, now, y'all all going to relate to this because we've all said this before. Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? God, do you not care that my boat is sinking? God, do you not care that my finances are about to go down? God, do you not care that my relationships are all falling apart? God, do you not care the fact that I have followed you and you have taken me out when it was peaceful water? And in the midst of following you at peace, all of a sudden there is a storm and I am about to die. God, do you not care? That's one of the biggest questions we get as individuals and as people, as those who follow Christ go through the crises of their lives. Does God care? So the question that I ask you this morning is this: do you really think God cares? That's a big question. Not in times of peace, because in times of peace, you're going to answer, well, yes, he cares. Look how good it is. But he sets us up to establish within our hearts who he is, because times of peace will not always exist in mine and yours world. He needs us to know something more. He needs us to know that in the midst of our storm, in the midst of our crisis, in the midst of despair, at our lowest, weakest points, that Jesus is good. Even if everything around us does not seem to be good. That helps us, because what it is setting you up for is this: to not be dependent upon your circumstances, but to be dependent upon him. And you need that, because a lot of us look at our circumstances as the determining factors in our peace and in our joy. And that's why our peace and our joy get so easily wrecked. Because for Christians, we're constantly going in and out of crisis. We're constantly going in and out of storm. And Jesus is refining within us that in the midst of the storm, something must take place. And so here's what he says to them. He awoke. He rebuked the wind and to the sea. Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. So the first thing he does when he wakes up, he sees the storm in their hearts. He sees the storm around them. And the first thing he fixes is the exterior storm. Because he knows that in order to have this conversation with their hearts at this point, he has to fix the exterior. Because if the boat's still filling up and some dude's trying to give you a sermon, how many of y'all sat through that before? You've been in that. You feel like you're drowning and some guy's up there preaching to you and you're going, dude, like, can you please stop preaching and come over here and pull me out of this? Jesus sees the storm that they are in, fixes the exterior storm. They see him fix the exterior storm. They know it is all about him and nothing about them. He fixes the storm. And there was a great calm. So again, we see this maneuvering of going in and out of storm, in and out of crisis. And it's all dependent upon who? Jesus. Who fixed the storm for them? Jesus did. He didn't go, okay, guys, here's what we're going to do. Everybody row to the left. He didn't tell them, everybody grab a bucket, start pulling stuff out. Because then, who would have a part in that? Them. And Jesus wants us to know the simple gospel is all about him, not about us. That when the crisis of your life hits, whatever crisis it is, whether it's external or whether it's internal, what we have to do is look to the author and founder of our faith and go, Jesus, this is all about you. I have to keep my eyes focused on who is going to truly fix this. Because if I look at myself and go, I can fix this, then I'm going to grab a bucket. And some of you here today are grabbing buckets going, okay, I'm trying. Like, Jesus, I believe in you. Like, I love you. Like, whenever you're ready, like, you do your thing. But I'm going to keep doing my thing until you do your thing. And Jesus is looking at us going, come on now. The gospel is not about you doing. It's about what I have done. Amen. That calms our hearts in the storm. Because when the crisis hits your world, you have to look to Jesus and go, I trust you in the midst of the storm. I trust you in the midst of the chaos. I don't understand. I don't know what's going to happen. If whatever happens, I survived this, it's going to be all because of you. Here's what he says to them next. So after he speaks to the storm, he then turns his attention to them. Why are you so afraid? Those are some big words into your life. Those are huge words into your heart. Why are you afraid? Do you know what capitalizes most of our minds, most of our thoughts, most of our intentions, most of our reactions? Fear. If Jesus is going to have to preach gospel into you, he's going to have to address the fear of your life. Some of you here this morning are afraid to follow Jesus, hence the word fear. Some of you this morning are afraid to come to the cross because you do not know how Jesus is going to react with your sin. Again, fear. Some of you, God has commissioned and called to do things that are absolutely beyond understanding, and the reason that you're not doing them as of yet is fear. Some of you are not even doing the thing that he commanded all of us to do, which was to go and make disciples. Go tell people about Jesus. The number one reason that we do not go tell people about Jesus, the number one thing that looks and lurks inside of all of our hearts, isn't that we don't want to. It isn't that we don't know what to say. It isn't that we don't know who to go talk to. The number one reason is, I am afraid. I am afraid of how they will respond to me. I am afraid of how I will portray it. I am afraid of what they may ask. I am afraid of what they may say. I am afraid. So the very first thing, Jesus gets to the core of this. When the storm arises, he fixes it, puts their hearts at peace. Here's what he says to them. Why are you afraid? Now, they could probably answer really well. The boat was 3/4 full of water. There was waves bigger than the boat. There was lightning and wind, and the boat was going sideways. You see, we can really look at fear, and fear is not that it's wrong. It's not that fear is what's bad, because we as people have legitimate reasons to fear the things that God is asking. We have legitimate reasons to be afraid. Could people respond bad to you when you want to tell them about Jesus? Absolutely. Could you go bankrupt if God asked you to give everything? Absolutely. Could you lose all of your time if you give it all to Jesus? Absolutely. Is there reasons to fear? The answer is yes. So you cannot walk in here today and go, God, I'm not going to be afraid. You cannot walk in here in your own power and ignore the brain that God has given you for the reasons that you should be afraid. There are very real implications to living a life following Jesus. And those implications of living a life following Jesus go face to face with our fears. Fear and faith are in constant battle. You will not alleviate the fear in your life. You must engage the fear in your life with the faith that God has aligned you with. That's what you and I need to do. So when the fear of sickness comes upon you, do not be sorrowful with yourself because you are afraid, but find your foundation in your faith in Jesus, who is able to conquer even the fears that you may have. This is what is important. This is what's going to sustain you through the next storm you're about to walk into, because you're going to walk into a storm, and whether you come talk to me as a pastor, whether you come talk to somebody else as a pastor, at the core of everything we're teaching is still going to come back down to this. Your faith is going to come into opposition with your fear. You will not have an absence of fear. You will not have an absence of faith. Here's what Jesus says to them. Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? Man, they had watched him heal. They had watched him do incredible works that no one else could do. And then in the midst of all of that, Jesus is going to come back at them with, do you still not have any faith? Maybe you've walked in here today and you think of yourself with a better capital of faith than you actually have. Because you are thinking that your faith is dependent upon the goodness. And the moment the storm enters your life, you're going to find your faith capital has gone way down below. And it's going to shake you at your core. Do I believe in Jesus? Do I really think that he is good? Do I really think that he can sustain me? Do I really think that he will get me through this? That even if he kills my body, that my soul is with him? You see, so much of our dependency is upon this external. Jesus goes, I got the external. I'll calm the waves. I'll calm the sea. I'll calm the wind. I'll heal the sick. I'll heal the blind. I'll do whatever I want externally, because everybody's thinking external is what I'm trying to get a hold of. And Jesus is really trying to get to the internals of your faith. So this morning, as you have came into church, as we have sang songs together, as we have corporately worshiped together, here is my question for you. How is the gospel impacting your faith? Is it strengthening your faith in the midst of the storm? Or is your faith only being strengthened because you are in the midst of goodness? And the moment the storm comes, your world is going to be rocked to the core. And even if it is, Jesus doesn't kick them all out of the boat. He doesn't go everybody out. If y'all don't want to follow me, if you don't got faith, fine. I'll do it on my own. Do you know how many people would do that, though? I mean, he has been with them, and they have watched as he has done numerous things. And they have been right there in the closest to where even the parables, he would sit down with them and break apart the parables for them in private. In public, the parables would be confusing as all get out. They would come sit down and go, Jesus, what were you talking about? How cool would that be to go, hey, Jesus, what did you mean by this? Because I've heard a lot of preachers give about 40 different interpretations, and they all sound pretty good. I'm just wondering, what were you trying to get to? The disciples had that opportunity. And so for the disciples to sit there with him in those private moments, in those quiet moments, and then for the storm to arise, and for them to go to him and go, do you even care that we're going to die? That's what hurt his heart. Because he does care for you. He loves you. He has sacrificed everything on the cross so that you and I can have access eternally to the Father. In spite of the rebellion of all of our hearts. That's amazing to me. And then for us to stand before God and go, do you even care that I'm going to die? Because there's a little water in the boat. Because there's a windstorm around us. So the next time the windstorm affects your life, the next time you begin to see your boat filling up, here's what I want to challenge you with. Instead of running away from Jesus, run into Jesus. Instead of blaming him, ask him, God, help me see what it is you're trying to show me. God, protect me in this. God, I know that you are good. And whatever it is that may besiege my life is in your hands. So he gets through to this. And one of the things that we find is this: fear and faith are side by side. So he teaches them this lesson. And then check this out. Chapter 5, verse 1. We'll get ready to close. They came to the other side of the sea. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. So let me break into this for a second. He calms the sea and he goes, let's go to a graveyard. Can you imagine the disciples like, really? Like, we felt like we were just about to die. So you're going to take us to the tombs. You would think he would go, hey guys, I know I just took y'all through a hard lesson. Let's go to a beach. Let's go sit down. We'll create some umbrellas. We'll all relax for a little bit. That's what we want to hear out of Jesus after we come out of the storm. Like we're exhausted emotionally. We're exhausted mentally. And we're wondering, God, what are you doing next? I'm glad I'm alive. Like you just called me out for my little faith. I'm going to try to have more faith in you now. And God goes, cool, let's go to the graveyards. You're testing me. Like, really, Jesus? You see, you may be coming out of a storm right now. Don't be surprised when God's walking you to a battlefield. You see, if we're not careful, we'll walk out of the storm and expect to go to the beach and sit under an umbrella. That's not Christianity. That's not the faith that Jesus is talking about. That's not what he's called us to. He's called us to go make disciples. He has called us to be a light in a dark world. He has called us to be a people of his choosing, called out for his pleasure and his purposes. He didn't call you to come and just chill out. So they go to this grave area. And immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs. No one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. He's really testing these guys. They get there, and here is this guy that elicits the most amount of fear that you're going to find anywhere. This guy's living among the tombs. Nobody can subdue him. They've tried to chain him. They've tried to keep him down. It has not worked. This is a fearful guy. You do not go near fearful guys. What do you do with fearful guys? You run and you leave them alone. Jesus rolls the boat right up there filled with water. Like, my boat's sinking, you're going to roll me up to the guy that typically you would run from. Everything about my faith and your faith is built upon this concept that Jesus is running us to the battlefield. And when we get to the battlefield, if we try to figure this out on our own, we're going to be wrecked. And our Christianity is so often built upon this idea of, well, my hand and God's hands are going to hold together, and as long as He holds on, it's going to all be good. And we're going to walk in pastures of green. And the battlefield shows up, and our hand gets a little like fidgety and wavery, like, whoa, like, I like the beach better. So here's what happens. Verse 5, night and day, among the tombs and on the mountains, he was also always crying and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" Little tad bit here. Jesus always likes to identify the name of the spirit that's haunting the soul. You may be here today, and fear and faith are in constant battle. And there is a fear inside of you that's needing to come out. There's something inside of you that is working deep in absolute difference to who God is. Jesus sees this in this man, and he goes, "What is your name?" And he replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside. And they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. The herdsmen fled into the city and into the country. The people came to see what was happening, and they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to leave the region. You want to know why? Because when Jesus comes into your world, it's not going to be what you think. These people knew where fear was. They knew where evil existed. Evil existed in that guy. So guess what the people all did? Stayed away from the guy. If you know where evil is, it's easy to stay away from evil by just not going near it. Jesus walks in, and what does Jesus do with their understanding of where evil is? He casts it out. Sends it into the pigs. And the pigs go down the hill, they go into the water, they all drown. What does that do to the evil? kills the pigs. But guess what about the evil? It releases it back out. This absolutely terrifies the community. It terrifies the people. They knew where evil was. They knew where bad was. Jesus had just turned it upside down. So for the sake of one, he sacrificed potentially many. For the sake of Jesus freeing this guy, he's willing to undo what they know and where they know evil to be. This confuses them. But not only that, those 2,000 pigs, that was their livelihood. That was their economy. It destroyed and wrecked their economy. So for the sake of this guy who was evil, they knew where he was. He was hiding in the tombs. He was with the dead people. He was living with the dead. That means he was essentially dead to them. Jesus brings this guy back, takes and breaks down their entire economy, takes and releases evil back into the world. And these people see Jesus, who has just wrecked their economy, who has just freed evil back into the world, and they see this guy sitting there, well-dressed, cleaned, in his right mind. And instead of going, man, God, that's good. You have done something incredible. You have saved a soul that was once lost, that the world had described as dead, that nobody could contain, nothing could control. And Jesus, you went after the one nobody wanted to go after. Instead of saying that, you know what they say? How could you do that? Like our fear, how are we going to live? How are we going to tell our kids where to go? Because now fear is out and about. It was easy before. We just told them, stay away from that dude. But now we are walking around, and because you have freed him, we are living in fear. And they cast him out of the region because their fear was stronger than their faith. You and I have these same storms and these same battles. They just come in different pictures. The disciples sat there in awe. Everything they had known was being undone in front of them. Jesus was taking the things that the world feared the most, and by faith, he was healing them. Jesus was taking the things that the world stayed away from the most, and Jesus was going to that and making it holy. Jesus was restoring what the world had deemed and understood, what the crowd knew was bad. Jesus was taking it and going, I know it was bad. I'm going to make it good. And if he can do that with that guy, what can he do with me? My sin, my shame, my fears, he can heal those. Today, you come into this place not as just an individual going to church today, but you come into this place engaging war in the spiritual world. On Wednesday night, we talked about how the spiritual being of a man is strengthened by Jesus himself. And today, you come in here and you're a part of that. Maybe fear is what you know as the initial conversation in your life. And Scripture is challenging you. Where there once was fear, there is now faith. Where there once was fear, there is now faith. I am afraid. That's one phrase. I have faith. That is another. Maybe in your heart and in your life, you have fear that you will go back to your old sin. But through the gospel, Jesus says you can have faith that I will remain faithful even if you do. And even whenever you do go back to your old sin, I'm going to pull you back out again. Because I am good, I am God, you are not. You see, for us to walk in here and think we're going to walk back out these doors and be perfect is a fallacy, because we're not. We're going to walk back out these doors, and you and I are going to operate at moments in fear when there should be faith. And if we're not careful, we will take ourselves and sit down on the sideline. Because when somebody on a ball game isn't doing well, what does the coach do? Sits them down, right? So that's what we think Jesus does with us. That whenever we don't do well, Jesus sits us down. But the gospel completely undoes that. Whenever we don't do well, the gospel shows us who Jesus is. And we get to live in His goodness and His grace and His perfection. We get to say we are forgiven by the cross. We are redeemed. There's no condemnation in us. I missed the game-winning basketball shot. That's cool. I get another chance. Why? Because in Jesus, I'm not condemned. In the world, you're going to sit me down. Jesus undoes everything about how we see life. This is what is so confounding and confusing about what can be our faith. Because we think it is all about us. The gospel says it is all about Him living in us. And when we are weak, He is strong. When we fail, He gives us forgiveness. When we can't do it, He can. When we don't think we're capable, it's good because He is. And the only thing we have to do is go, God, my boat's sinking, but I'm with you. Quit trying so hard to make yourself righteous and allow His righteousness to be lived in you. One more time, because that's deep and you're going to need that later on. Quit trying so hard to make yourself righteous, but allow His righteousness to live in you. Because His righteousness living in you will still show forth the goodness of who He is. But you trying to be righteous will only show you how evil you really are. And you recognize that when you try to do good, and even Paul says this, what I want to do, guess what? I wind up not doing. And what I don't want to do, I wind up doing. I got to rest in Christ. Because on me, I'm just going to always mess this up. Self-righteous living will always mess it up. You trying to be good on your own will always mess it up. Because every time you try to be good on your own, that one time you fail, you're going to feel like the storm is sinking your boat and you're done. But if you let yourself rest in Him, then His righteousness will be in you. And that means when sin approaches your door, it won't be because you turn it away. It will be because He is greater than the sin that is in this world. And you want Him more than you want the sin. That's what it is to be in relationship and fellowship with Jesus. The last part of Mark 4 and the first part of Mark 5 gives us great understanding into what the gospel is. That through fear, our faith can be strengthened. That even in spite of the fear that we have, our faith can be grounded. So don't let your fear be the condemnation of your soul, but let your fear be what God uses to strengthen your faith. A lot of us say, I don't want fear anymore. The gospel shows us that when our fear rises, our faith should also rise. And that's what you find out of His children. That when the storms assail, they rest in Jesus. That there's peace in knowing Him. That there's joy in knowing Jesus. There's hope in knowing Jesus. There's not joy and peace in my storm. There's not joy and peace in the goodness this world has to offer. There is joy and peace in knowing Jesus. Today, God gives each one of us the opportunity to know Jesus. And therefore, know the joy and hope that God offers. In spite of the storm that you may be in. There was a gentleman that said this, and I close. Sometimes we invite people to follow Jesus without giving them any idea that accepting His invitation may be costly. In our eagerness to offer them hope and healing, we may understate the ways faith will change them. Underestimate the power and the entrenched structures of evil, or explain away the tension between faith and fear. That is certainly not the way Mark and Jesus proclaim the gospel. Mark highlights the healing at the same time that he probes the tension between faith and fear. He presents Jesus' words and ministry as parables that offer the hope of the gospel in simple terms, while he also shows how an encounter with Jesus changes the structure of life. Did you hear me? An encounter with Jesus changes the structure of life. The tension between faith and fear may be with us for most of our lives. Whenever we take a risk for the gospel, we may also find something to fear. Our responsibility is neither to shy away from fear nor to make ourselves numb to it. Our challenge is to act in faith even when we are afraid. That is the challenge we cannot meet alone. The gospel is good, and the gospel really engages our lives. Let's pray.